I'm going to start with the first question, right? And if you can, after I ask the question, you could rephrase it within your answer. So it's like my first question is, what is this thing that I'm calling divine for you? And you could rephrase it as, well, for me the divine is, or the divine is, something like that, that it's incorporated in, however that feels comfortable for you.
I got you. Take it into my frame of meaning.
Yes.
Okay.
So why don't we start? Yeah. What is this thing for you?
For me, what is this thing? What is this thing that calls me? Bottom line, I don't know. Start with that. My belief is that it is the ground of being, that it is a spirit or spirit that holds creation. It's not identical with creation. If it were identical with creation, to relate to it, to be intimate with it, to me would involve merging, would involve being lost in the collective. So for me it's distinct from mass energy space-time, yet fully present in mass energy space-time. So this universal spirit to me is something that's very, very immediate, more immediate than I am. It's not far away, it's more here than I'm here right now. So it's sort of like I'm trying to show up. I'm trying to get here, to hear that. And I suppose a universality of that spirit. And personal meaning, it knows who I am. To me, this divine is some being who knows me, and loves me. Well, like I started with the meditation, right? It's not a sort of a blind cosmic force. It's not a life force. It's not, it's not a force of evolution. It is someone who can address me and can guide me, and whom I can trust and don't need to be standoffish with or fearful of, because there's an empathic connection. I feel that whoever this divine is knows me better than I know myself, kind of idea. So I suppose to finish it off, because this is ideas about that, that I think ideas about the divine, the ones that I use, the ones that are meaningful to me, are ones that help me continually open to my relationship with the divine. So I don't have concept of the divine as someone who's going to make me suffer for my own good, or punish me, or in any way be deceitful or deceiving of me. So, and where's that coming from? That's just faith. I don't know. But that's one of the ways I think about the concepts of the divine. Do they help me come into relationship, or do they make me withdraw and stay away? So if it's a blind collective force, it's something that I'm going to maintain my distance. I'm going to tune in maybe at different times, but I'm not going to expect friendship. I'm not going to expect intimate relationship. So, how? It's not, theory is important. Conceptual understandings of that are important, because if I do have that concept of, God is evil, or God creates, God causes death and destruction, that's going to keep me away. So it's somebody I trust, whoever it is, to listen to call.
I'd like to ask you if you could tell of some of your own personal experiences with the process of seeking, receiving, and following guidance or call. I say seeking, receiving, and following because for me, I've noticed that I seek, I receive, and I follow. So if that rings true for you, if you could hold that as well, as you're heading through your past experience, if that rings true, then you do.
Okay, use those. No, those are meaningful. That's neat. Although I would say my first, most dramatic call, I wasn't seeking. At least I wasn't seeking consciously. So.
Or was it seeking you?
It was seeking me. Yeah, I think that's more like it. I mean, that it makes me immediately think of this particular experience in 1968. In 1967, my brother died of an overdose of heroin in Bellevue Hospital, New York City. He's 2 years younger than I. I was, 22? Something like that. He was 2 years younger than I. We had just started getting connected after having the big brother, little brother thing, and we were starting to, like each other as people. So he dies in 67. And I went into a very long depression, funk, dark time for about a year. Carried on, went to school, was an undergraduate. Made it through that year and sort of was feeling better. There's more sunlight in my life. And at that time, I was not spiritual. I was not religious. I thought about the one and things like that. I had experimented a lot in psychedelics. This is the 60s, and I thought myself an explorer of the mind and was interested in taking as many different kinds of psychedelics as I could. And that was part of the culture of my subculture and also a larger culture. But I didn't have any real faith. I didn't have there was nothing that was holding, for instance, this experience of losing my brother. So what happened was I was with some friends. This is after, I guess I graduated by that time, 68, October. Interesting. October 1968. And we were sitting around with very close friends that I'd been undergraduate with, and started talking about, getting very intimate, talking about thinking and sort of our insides and what was it like to experience, and one of those great conversations. And this one woman turned to me and said to me, "You mean you've never explored your mind on psychedelics?" I forget what I had said just before that, but I'll always remember that question, because that question made me very, very afraid in that moment. Because what I realized the truth was to say no. Even though our culture had been, well, hasn't that what we've been doing? We've been reading, Timothy Leary and Ram Dass, whoever, Tibetan Book of the Dead, and here we are, and we're losing our ego, and aren't we exploring all this? The truth in that moment was no, even though I could say, well, of course, yes, I have some, of course, and there's always more to learn, blah, blah, blah. Anyway, in that moment I said no, unequivocally, against this huge fear, which, I've thought about it a lot since then, but you could talk about that fear in a lot of different ways. But basically, was I going to be truthful in this, and maybe be rejected by all these friends, and maybe be seen as, some sort of strange, pretending deviant within the group or something. When I said that word, suddenly a huge weight that I didn't realize was on me lifted. Huge, we can use all the words, ineffable, blah, 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 but basically a peak experience. I felt light. I felt like I saw there was nothing to fear in the universe. I saw that, that we are all developing towards this, that these fears didn't have to be there, blah, 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 and went off on, for the next month or so, thinking in these terms, reevaluating who I was, wondering what this meant for my life, wondering why no one had ever told me about this, wondering what religion was. So it was like there's an awakening, and now there's a seeking. Now I'm seeking, okay, what was that? Where did it come from? What does it mean? And also how to express it. There was a wanting to talk about it, to express that, to express the wonder and the beauty of this, that there's nothing to fear, basically, or that life is a lot more wonderful than I'd ever been told. And so how best to communicate that? Well, religion's a good way to do it. Let me see, what are all the religions? I thought about, was there a school I could go to where I could, major in Zen Buddhism and have a minor in Roman Catholicism? And, I learned, no, you have to go into each religion. And but I got to the point of what I wanted to do was to describe and express this reality in a scientific paradigm. Because as I looked around, the culture was primarily scientific. There were no, it was doctors and scientists that were selling aspirin on TV. You didn't see many ministers and rabbis, right, saying. So my perception was that that's what the culture was listening to mostly. So I wanted to know where this was in that. and to try to describe and express this reality in that kind of a framework. So where was that? Again, seeking, well, psychology. So, I mean, within the sciences, it seems like psychology was where to go to. So I began exploring. I began looking for a spiritual psychology, a psychology that spoke about that, and then discovered Maslow, and towards the psychology of being was a big one for me. Reading that, so seeking, searching for the psychology. Read a lot of Jung at that point, just buried myself in the collected works at that time. Dropped out of my master's program that I was in, master's in teaching, started taking undergraduate psychology courses. Got a job teaching a section of college freshman English. I was a BA in English. Which before I was afraid to do my practice teaching at the high school level before this experience. After the experience, here I go to the college and say, I hear you're missing, that you need somebody to teach this section of, so how about, so they hired me in. So there was a real sort of fearlessness and an interest in this direction that I started following, and I've been doing that ever since. I mean, that is an unbroken direction in my life. There's been many ups and downs and backs and forths, but in terms of a life direction that unfolded from that experience, even though it wasn't, I wasn't seeking that. And it wasn't really, the call is not the experience. The call was like, oh my God, there's something much bigger.
Talk about that moment, please.
It's hard to describe that. I mean, there was a physical experience of lightness, of a weight being lifted off of me, which I didn't even know was there. A lot of insights. It's as if all my neurons were, it's a seizure, but all my synapses, all my neurons were clicking. Closest to it would be like having the answer to a problem, discovering the answer to a problem, and having an aha. But it was an aha about existence, sort of. I was very excited, maybe a little manicky. We could say too, there's a depression and a manicky. So lower unconscious, higher unconscious movement.
Was there a sense that it came from some higher place?
Not in a personal way, necessarily. It was as if I had stumbled onto a reality. There was a sense of that the universe is benign and loving and inviting us towards wonderful things. So there was a huge optimism, but there wasn't a sense of what I was talking about earlier, of suddenly a personal connection with that ground. It was more like I stumbled in here and, oh my goodness, what does this mean? And it is benign, and how do I express this? I'm excited about expressing this reality.
Did you ever have a connection with that ground?
Yeah, that came later. Let's see, probably 68, 78, yeah, about 10 years later. Okay, I'm following this. And I'm following a psychology that believes in a deeper spirit in each of us that does guide us. I mean, the wise person kind of meditation I've been doing since those years, since the 70s. So there was a sense of direction. There was a sense of a call, but it wasn't. It was more like. It's interesting. It's more like there's this vision that I really want to manifest. It was sort of like saving the world, or I want to express this, and it was a vision of what could be that was drawing me along, which, in retrospect, is different from what the more personal, immediate call. I mean, yes, it was a call. There was an invitation through that, but I was more caught up in the vision. It was almost in a way an idolatry. It was almost, this vision is what it is, versus, where's God in this, or where's, I just assumed, because this vision was so great, that this was sort of what I'm supposed to be doing. And that, what happened was that crumbled. That what myself and others were trying to do in building towards that crumbled because of, I think, because of it being an idolatry, because of it being, this is what we're about, which meant that we don't look at, so anything in the way of that is less. See, the vision takes up space. In fact, there was a period when that was so important that that's all I did and all I thought about was building this thing. And interpersonal relationships weren't important, and in fact they were a distraction. Personal time was felt to be somehow letting the vision down, because how could I be spending time over here indulging myself, quote unquote, rather than doing this vision, which was so important. And that crumbled. People have called that a cult, what I was involved in at that time. And that's true, and that was the dynamic of it that I just described. All of us in there saying, this is so important that we need to do this, and egging each other on, and yes, hurting each other, saying, you shouldn't be doing that. You shouldn't be taking that time. You should be here. Well, I see it every day in my practice. It's what happens in a startup. It's what happens in the Silicon Valley. I mean, people are doing that very same behavior, maybe with different values. They're not thinking they're going to save the world or change psychology or, the things that we were sort of after. Anyway, to answer your question, that all came crumbling down. And as that was happening, and during and afterwards, I also inwardly was crumbling. I was going into, you could call it a depression, you could call it a dark night. But it'd been hard for me to keep teaching, even before it was crumbling. I was crumbling inside, mysteriously so. Although now I see that it was part of the whole crumbling. I was just one of the early people to start crumbling. And that gets to when you're asking, was there a time when I felt it as a personal connection? And again, it was a discrete experience. I mean, during that time, I was I was reading a lot of monastic literature and spiritual. I was reading Teilhard de Chardin. I was reading about the Western mystics. I was reading Thomas Merton. I was reading Zen. I forget, Taoism. Because up to that time, I'd been sort of generic, like, well, spirit is spirit, and it's sort of. I wasn't really looking at a lot of the manifestations of people who followed spirit and what their lives. So I was reading like the lives of different saints and things like that. So I was tuning into that. I was going to churches, different churches during this time. Again, this is a time of darkness. It's a time when I'm not teaching. It's a time when this group I was working with said, go and just do this because you're not functioning here. So it was a blessing in a way. I mean, I was given this time. I mean, there are different ways of looking at that. Poor John has been ostracized. But I was grateful to have, I wasn't functioning, and here I was being supported. I was getting my paycheck to go and do this thing. Unfortunately, we couched it a little bit like I have to do battle with my inner demon, but it was less of that and much more a dark night. It was a disintegration. It was a darkness that I needed to go through in retrospect. So I was lying on my bed one day, and I just felt this awful, awful, awful disintegration in me. Like I was falling. Falling was an experience. I remember having the thought that they'll find me dead the next morning, or whenever they would finally come and look for me. I was living in this little room in San Francisco by myself. A fall, the kind of fall that just grips your stomach, like the elevator has been cut, and it's that kind of fall, only it's into an abyss. Doesn't seem like it seems bottomless. It seems like it's falling out of the universe, like there's a crack in the universe into oblivion, and I'm falling out of that. I'm slipping out of that. Some personal content in that was, as a fetus, there was a moment in that of being a fetus who realizes he could never, there's no place for him as a fetus. And it was just a despair. There's no place in the universe for me. There was a falling, a disintegration, and they're going to find my body. And there's just this incredible experience of plummeting through black space. And in the extremity of that plummeting, there was this very interesting experience in which the plummeting itself, this experience of movement through space, falling, changed so that that very experience was holding me. I mean, it was very strange because it's almost like like I think a polarized lens works or something. There was a shift of perspective so that falling actually was realized. I realized it to be a holding, and that it wasn't a falling, it was a holding. There wasn't like, oh, I've fallen through and I've hit something or been caught. It was that very falling itself was a holding. So something changed in me at that moment to experience that falling as being held. And at that point, I was somehow aware of being held by someone. And to me, it looked like a woman who looked like Jesus. And to me, it was, that was tremendously personal. This was not the vision. This was not, the drive of evolution. This was somebody who was holding me and loving me and caring about me. And nothing's been the same since then. I began relating to this person named Jesus. I continued my wanderings to, it's basically now seeking this one, whoever it is. Seeking him and being called by him, I guess, are very similar. You probably can't seek unless you have some sense that there's something calling you, something to be sought, maybe. And I had other experiences following that. I mean, like being at a mass and seeing him come off the cross towards me. I really understood saints and their visions because it was clear that nobody else was seeing that. I was clear that that was an inner, but I could see it. It was fascinating. And
Saying something to you?
well, just the power of it, I guess. I've had plenty of hallucinations in the 60s. I enjoyed them and blah, blah, blah. And I could always see, it's, I don't know what I'm saying about that. But the idea of the hallucination, quote unquote, of that, it wasn't the fact of him coming off. It wasn't the fact that I could see him externally like that happening. It was the fact that it was him. You know what I mean? So it's not the phenomenon. It's not the phenomenon was startling enough, but I had a lot of startling phenomena, we've seen people melt and, all the psychedelic stuff. But this is, what was significant here was, it was this guy. It was this person who I knew and who was saying basically, hi, and maybe even, keep coming.
In your daily life, do you seek guidance? And how do you do that? And how does it come? And how do you discern where it's from?
Yes, and to me, that's more important today. The great visions, or here's what you're going to do with your life, or, those things can happen. But again, my perception of that God is he's very, very close. So yes, what's happening right now between John and Mark, how how we got here, you know, the synchronicities that got us to be sitting here together. That stuff I pay attention to. Pay attention to synchronicities. I pay attention to different events that happen. I try to pay attention to what's happening in my body, my feelings, where my thoughts are taken. Why am I thinking about this and not that? So I consider it very imminent, call very present moment to moment. And I'm more focused on that these days than I am the kind of call where, you know, the angel will come and say, go and save my people, deliver my people. And probably one of the places I listen most closely, not probably, the place I listen most closely today, right now, is in my relationship with Anne. That the things that happen, and it's an interesting, she's the first woman that I felt called to be with, versus somebody that I wanted to go to bed with, and then it evolved into something, or you know, our life circumstances took us together. Or to me, this relationship feels like call, and our work together feels like call. And what happens between us is one of the richest places I hear my Lord speaking to me. And it may not be in anything she says or does, but I've had a strong invitation, for instance, with her, to love her much more than I ever wanted to love, because I know that that amount of caring means you're looking at a hell of a loss. You're looking at a hell of a, you know, and that's been a struggle. And I feel invited to that by our relationship. And I also pray, I ask for the strength to do that. I ask that I can love in that way. Because left to my own devices, you know, look, if you're calling me here, you know, let me love. Let that love flow through to Anne. Basically, love Anne through me. You know, that's a prayer. And that's been very transformative for me. I mean, that brings up the losses. It's made me much more open to my own grief process, which is one of the things. My family of origin, we wouldn't talk about that. We never talked about my brother's death, for instance. We never really sat and grieved it. We never talked about it as a family. It was like, oh, that's over with. Since being with Anne and being called in this particular direction, you know, when we have a cat die that we love, I can feel that grief. And I know today that it won't destroy me, that this Lord, even in my tears and my grief, carries me through somehow. It's not...
Feel that invitation. You talk of the invitation that you experience between you. How do you experience that?
The invitation of us being together?
I guess what's interesting is when you said that in the relationship you almost hear an invitation to love me.
Mm-hmm.
Is it like a voice inside, or a feeling, or energy?
It's more the that's a good question. it's more like seeing a potential, seeing a door open. It's almost like I experience it as seeing something. I'm feeling something and thinking something and sensing something. But it's much more like the awareness blossoming that's something that I'm not doing and I could do. It's seeing that, and it's not a word, it's not, I like the word invitation more than call so much, because it's not even the imperative, you better do this to be close to God. It's like, hey, if you want, look at here, And I feel it very much. I have this experience of it being so obvious that, of course, I want to go that way, that it almost doesn't feel like a choice, but it is. My will is, I'm saying yes to that potential. And it's also I'm aware of what it's going to mean too. So there can be a struggle, but there's a yes to that.
That brings up some questions. It seems that you're doing some discerning there. How do you discern if that invitation is from this more divine and from some other source within you? Are there certain qualities of the invitation that are different?
Well, there was a time when I would say it's more cut and dried than I think of it today. And I'm actually fairly confused about this, but I'll just throw out my confusion. There was a time when I could say, the more I explore myself, the more I know all my different parts, my desires, my weaknesses, my strengths, all of me. To that extent, I can then begin to, when I hear a voice, when I hear an invitation, realize that, oh yeah, that's not this, coming in and tricking me, right? It's not simply my desire, a rationalization to say, well, the Lord told me to, and that still makes sense, that pattern. In fact, that's the 4 stages of psychosynthesis. Exploration, acting in relationship to the different parts, so taking care of them, nurturing them, not letting them dominate you, but dancing with them. 3rd stage, hearing call. 4th stage, responding to call. So that pattern still makes sense to me. However, I have also had the experience of, yes. How did you know that was going to happen? Did you hear it?
About the tremor in the forest.
However, I've also had the experience of just following well, I'll give you the concretes. We go to a motorcycle rally. I get excited about the motorcycle rally. Hadn't been around motorcycles for years and years. And I struggle with, do I want to keep going in that direction? Does that, what do I have to do with motorcycles? But it just felt it felt good, and I followed that. So I got a motorcycle. I started riding. Okay. And I struggled with, isn't this just a distraction in my life? I'm supposed to be doing this teaching and this, this doesn't fit. Isn't this just a diversion? It's interesting. It harks back to the old idea of here's this vision that's really important, and so you have to cut off things in order to respond. But I was uncomfortable with this thing, because here I was joining, and I'd have friends say, so what is it you get out of riding the motorcycle? And I wanted to be able to say, well, I'm having a deep spiritual kind of, no, I really enjoyed it. I liked the excitement of it. I liked the speed, the agility of the motorcycle. I loved riding. And I just like it. But I was uncomfortable with that, because how does that fit into, could my Lord be asking me to ride a motorcycle? Well, my discernment was to bring that to my Lord, to bring that to that source. And it was a continual lifting it up. Like, if this isn't right, take it away. And there were times when I knew I was willing to do that. So that would be one discernment, probably. And if there had been the inability, for me to imagine God saying, okay, I want you to stop riding motorcycles. He walks in. We do this exercise. You hear a knock on the door. It's God. He's going to tell you something about, are you willing to open the door? Okay, if he was going to say, okay, that's really off, you got to let go of that. Are you willing to do that? I was clear. I was willing. And if there was, if there's some horrible loss under that, to me that would indicate personal work to do, to reach to that which was underneath the attachment to the motorcycle. Is it, anyway. And in that discernment, in bringing it with open hands, basically, I forget, there's an exercise I think we did in class. One of the nice things about teaching is that we're always doing these exercises. But I forget exactly, it was, I guess, talking to a wise person. And it was, suddenly I could see my life all the way back in a line. All the deep abiding strain in me, theme in me of driving, of riding, from hitchhiking with my father from LA to Chicago when I was 6, to hearing stories of my dad on his motorcycle or jumping freights or hitchhiking, to me hitchhiking around Europe, hitchhiking across the States, riding the motorcycle across the States in '64. Always loving riding, driving, driving an 18-wheeler for a year and a half, driving a turbine car for Chrysler Corporation, 65 World's Fair. I mean, all that was out of my head when I was thinking about the motorcycle. But what happened in that discernment was, look, dummy, this is part of you. This is something, this is not some sort of momentarily distraction out of the air. This is something that is coming from your roots, And I think that is one way I think about discernment. There's a St. Thomas Aquinas has a principle called grace builds on nature, meaning your natural inclinations, your natural, that's where grace builds. It's not that, you're this one way by nature and you're called to be something, in which you drop all your gifts. You forget that you have a training in film, right? Or that you love motorcycling, or you love that. You're not then called to drop that all and then become somebody completely different. So that your call, I mean, again, you can't nail it down, but to discern, is it coming from? And when I was starting to follow that, see, it wasn't like, here's the Lord saying, go thee and ride a motorcycle. It was like, I really like that shiny motorcycle, and I like the people, and I like the sound. So it was all very sensual. But as I see it now, it was a call. And there are things that are coming from that there are qualities of concentration, of decisiveness, of power that come into my life. That motorcycling branch feeds in sort of the main root of my life. So there are qualities important to me, important in my sort of daily life. So, it's mysterious.
Let's take one moment.
Mm-hmm. So concrete tools and practices. As a therapist, that is one of the main things I do, is listen to what my call is in terms of how to be with who I'm sitting with. And as a part of that, being very interested in what is emerging in terms of an invitation in their life and helping the person tune into that. So it's sort of like being paid, getting my livelihood from having to focus on call in myself and other people. I mean, that's pretty strong. Plus teaching in this area focuses me, like I said, about I'm always doing the exercises that we're doing, in classes. So it's every day I'm trying to plumb what this thing is of call. The concrete kind of exercise too would be, a wise person. For me, talking to Jesus, but also whoever shows up in my inner world, because the images can change. Discerning what my attachments and compulsions are. There's a process that I use with myself and with other people in which I try to make sure that I'm as free as I know I can be to respond to what God might want from me. And how I do that is facing anything. Am I willing? What would I have to feel in order not to go in this direction? And what would I have to feel in order to go in this direction? So it's sort of like making a clearing. Okay, if I'm called to X, Y, and Z, I'm going to feel, and to say yes to that, I'm going to feel awful. I'm going to feel this. I'll feel excited. I'll feel a loss of that. I'll feel this and that and that. To make sure, okay, I know that. I know those feelings. I'm open to those feelings. If I don't respond, I'll feel this and that and that and that. And just knowing that creates a place, helps create a place to hear the call and then to respond to it. So that's sort of a process. That can go into different kinds of exercises. concretely, going to sacred places, going to church, nature, now being on a motorcycle is a place that has developed, actually. You're alone and you're extremely alert, that's pretty good practice to be able to hear. One of the things I like about the motorcycle is if you're not present, you know it pretty fast. You're usually in a ditch or something. It's a very sort of mindful practice.
These practices, would you say it's an integrated part of your life?
Yes, I would say all of those things that I say to you are either daily or weekly. A sort of focus on that.
How has all this affected your life?
Well, it's brought me through all that stuff that I talked about. For me, it's given me a sense of, this is good, it's a sense of being in the right place at the right time. It's a sense of, for a lot of years after that peak experience in '68, it felt like there was this place I needed to get to, or something that I needed to make happen. Enlightenment was just around the corner. Something was going to happen. I was going to live in that space the whole time. I must be screwing up if that hasn't happened. But it was almost like this, there's an enlightenment addiction, kind of. And the business of call, moment to moment to moment, I've been released from that. I shouldn't touch that. And it just feels like I'm in the right place. It's a peaceful, I don't know a lot about the future and where I'm going. It's not that I'm comfortable with the future by knowing the future, which before I was. It was like, this vision's going to happen, so that's cool, so I feel good. Today, it's much more, I'm in the right place now, and I'm released from that kind of, future compulsion, and I just feel like I'm in the right place. And if I'm not, I pray that I'll hear that I'm not. But I don't, all the millenarian stuff and the Y2K stuff and the, the year 2000 stuff, is God going to come? Is there going to be cataclysms? I don't know. All I know is if I can just keep abiding in where I'm supposed to be, then, then I feel like I sort of am doing what I'm called to do. And all those events and whatnot, they don't have a lot, that's not call to me. It used to be. It was, this event's going to happen, and then, and I'm called to that, and I'm going to be this thing, or we're going to create this thing, or it's much more like I'm called to be right here with Mark. And where does this go? I don't know, but it's not anything that I've done. I think it is simply my call has released. You asked, forget even what your question was. How does it change my life? There's some sort of being in the moment as being it, as opposed to it being someplace I'm going to get to.
How does that feel? Is it relief?
Relief, yeah. It feels, there's a peace in it. It feels all different ways, because sometimes this moment has fear in it, sometimes this moment has depression in it, sometimes this moment has excitement in it, but it's a call to each of those. It's a call to, that's who I am, that's who I am, that's my place.
Does that mean we're done?
With the camera.
Oh.
But the tape is gone.
Okay. So that was interesting to me. Yeah, it's not a call to, it hasn't given me a particular kind of experience, in a way. It's given me the ability to show up for whatever my experience is. So whatever happens in this moment, even if it's embarrassing or is what I'm called to experience. So I guess there's not a secondary, there's not an, oh my God, I'm feeling this way, therefore that means so much as, well, that could still happen. But it's more, oh, I'm feeling this way. I hate that feeling. And that's what I'm called to. It's like I'm held in that. None of that's going to hurt me. I don't know.
What, for some reason, I have one more question for you. What would it be like not to be called? How would that, I guess what's coming up for me is, what is this experience of being called, of listening and following? What does it bring into your life that wouldn't be there?
I think without that, I would have to have something to replace it. I think without that, I would basically have to have an idol. I would have to have an addiction. I'd have to think about it more, but that's what comes. It's like I need that meaningful connection to all of this. And if it's not going to be a relationship with that which is behind and through all of this, then it's going to have to be relation to something here. So it might be a building something or a relationship.
So is it like what Frankel was talking about, and that this need to have meaning?
Yeah, I guess. And without it, it's hard to go on. Yeah, I understand it conceptually as that we draw, that our sense of existence flows to us from that ground of being. Short of that, we've got to, if that's cut off to us, we're going to get it through something else. We're going to get it through power, wealth. That will become my call. There will be a call. It's just, do you want it to be from the ground, or do you want it to be, an alcoholic's called to alcohol. William James, right? It's spirit. He says it's a spiritual quest, and the person's getting entangled in the alcohol as trying to get to that.
Mm.
So I think that's what would happen. I would basically, without call, understood in this way, it would naturally devolve into, I would still be called, only my perception would be, it would be alcohol that would call me, or I would become a fanatic in this, or whatever. So I guess that's interesting. So I guess we're always going to be called and responding.
Is there anything else that you feel you need to say, or does this feel complete for you?
One more thing, which is, I think there's a call that you're responding to, and it's coming. I think call is, the notion of call is calling us in today. In, I mean, if I think of the books, think of The Soul's Code, Hillman's book, or Lavoie's book, Callings, or Bolus's Drive, Destiny Drive. Assagioli's always in there, and what's his name? Bogart's
Life's Calling.
Finding Life's Calling. I mean, I think that that notion is coming, and that I think Bogart points out in that article in Journal of Humanistic Psychology that it's a slightly different paradigm than talking about states of consciousness or becoming enlightened or ladder of transformation in any sense. It's more transcendent than states of consciousness. It's more transcendent and immanent, and that it's happening. I think that I don't know, just that, and I think you're responding to it. And I think my hunch, that's why we keep bumping into each other, because I guess I said it.
It's the call of the call.
The call of the call. Call of the call, I think, is happening. So I am very pleased that you were called to this. I wish you well with this dissertation.
And thank you for answering.